My name is Daniel. I came in initially in different positions, but ended up in working very much at the Nature Center, and then being the director of culture across the organization, which includes the Tracy Aviary Liberty Park campus, as well as this campus, and then even a little bit with our kind of off-site stuff as well.
My name's Marissa. I was brought in as a co-director to this guy, but very quickly that changed. I'm the director of the Nature Center, which when I started was a brand new position. I had previously been manager position, and we've kind of expanded to a director position when I first started about 2 years ago.
I guess before we get into the name, I think both the words conservation and community have a range of definitions, even just internally. And so that was the first thing that I was kind of trying to figure out, like, all right, what is meant collectively, even though internally there might be distinct definitions around both of those things, and what I think of, and I think a lot of the times, not just here, but just in the society in general, the idea of community is usually at best community engagement, which is still kind of external coming in and then leaving, or kind of just that outside in. And for me, kind of, I was coming home in a sense. I'd been gone for almost a decade, but grew up here, and so it's like I kind of blurred the lines in some ways of like, oh, I'm a Westside community member, but now I'm in this professional position. But for me, first things first is like, all right, well, what's the indigenous name? How do we uphold that? And long story short, eventually now we are the Nature Center at Okwai, which included a lot of different stuff, a lot of research.
A lot of relationship building. With urban indigenous populations, tribal nations, and also the board, right? The board of trustees had questions and caveats to make sure that stuff was happening as well. And so like that, eventually got approved and in, and there's, I guess, a lot of stuff that happened where there's two other parts, right? Like, there's the Pawopi, which is Noah Daikwa for boat or canoe, and we played around with that last year. Yeah, we explained our goal and our mission of getting people on the river in a new way, and they were like all about it. So luckily we had the resources from the Jordan River Commission to make sure it was safe, and we had the equipment. And then we did the paddles and learned a lot, and we're still doing them this summer, which is
really so it's our second year doing it, which is cool. But that I think was huge because it was good to kind of get response from a diverse set of different communities and hear their support and interest for learning about indigenous history, indigenous place names.
And even just the water itself.
Yeah, and then just spending time on the water.
Like, I don't want to do that. Like, even I, the first time I was like, I'm gonna paddle on Okwai, like I always learned it was dirty, and then just had the best experience. It's such a different perspective seeing it from the actual water, and I think almost everybody that's done Pawopi with us has had that same.
Oh yeah, it's always been positive.
And they want to go again.
Yeah, even when awesome. I've seen people fall in, they
they're still like,
still have positive experiences.
Yeah.
And I think that was really cool, especially, every time it's cool, but like that first year, being able to get folks that I grew up with, or from the community that had these stigma stories and had lived next to the river almost all their lives, and then finally getting on there, and we're like, whoa, like total perception shift,
like learning there's so many birds and mammals and just like so many plants. It feels like you're not actually in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
And it kind of, I think, getting on the river like that, at least for me, I can actually start to try to imagine maybe what it looked like before it was turned into what it is now,
Yeah.
We've talked about this before, but the river used to be 5 times larger. It wound through, so it's about 50 miles now, but it was 250 miles of winding river, wetlands. So actually getting on the river it kind of makes you think, oh, what would this have been like?
Which has been cool. I think that reminds me like the other component of like projects of like just storytelling, right? Like how do we tell different stories, counter narratives to the dominant one that is a story of stigma and, right, like abuse and pollution for the last century and a half or so. And so like just getting those stories and these different relationships. And that also was a shift too, right? And thinking about like shifting to community-based and then imagining community-led in terms of
there's folks that have these very intimate relationships with the place and with the river. So while there are a lot of people that have that stigma, and it was awesome to see this destigmatization for many of them having positive relationships with the river and kind of re-narrating it. There was others who have had positive perceptions and empirical observations over, being raised here, but use a different language than perhaps mainstream conservation or mainstream environmentalism. And so that project, Stories of Place, was a way, that wasn't the only one, but that was one that highlighted for people in particular with unique language and relationship and perspectives, but there's so many others beyond that have that, right? And I guess that's the other thing that I think of was one of the strategies of sneaky nature, right? Because nature has associations, outdoor recreation has associations, environmentalism, conservation has associations, and so how do we be sneaky about avoiding that, because that's why a lot of people don't see themselves in it, and then when they do show up, the sneaky part is oh man, I really enjoyed this experience on the river, or seeing all these flowers, or watching these birds, and I like that, and that's different. So just kind of having that different approach, responding to how what language they use for all that stuff.
Yeah, I think something that's really cool about this name change and about the types of conversations we've been having with folks is really encouraging that relationship with this place and with this river. I personally always had whenever I tried to reflect on that, it's always felt very complicated coming from, a settler background. How do I feel at home in a place that it was stolen? And it's just a complicated thing being in this place. But I learned when we had Tavita Kaili here, learned about if you're not native to this place, how do you learn a responsibility of stewardship and do better as an inhabitant now? And as complicated as it is, it's not perfect. I think it's really good to be thinking about those things. And by giving the river back its name that it's always had and trying to bring back place names, or not even bring them back, but use them more, make them feel like a more normal part of the conversation, I think that will challenge people to, examine their own relationship, and instead of feeling ownership over a place, maybe learning to live in cohabitation and stewardship with it and with the people that are there. And it's hard work and it's complicated and it's not always easy to explain. Obviously, I always struggle to explain it, but I do think it's really good to be thinking about, instead of just ignoring it and letting the river continue to be destroyed.
Yeah, it is. I think that paradigm shift, which has to happen at many, many levels, and it takes time, because it is about having those meaningful, thoughtful relationships with people of the place, with the place, and with many other peoples. And what that means for us, because we're here. So what does it mean for us to be here right now? And if we're willing to kind of refuse to continue ignoring, all these different histories and realities and a deep, deep history, then we have an opportunity of relating differently and following that lead. And I think that's where that kind of the dream of community-led, that starts for me with local indigenous communities. And then of course, all the diversity of the world that's here now. Each have a unique way of things to bring. But I guess for me, I was taught to respect my elders. And so the elder peoples, the first peoples is what I will always kind of put first. And even there's a practicality to it. The indigenous ecological knowledge to me is the empirical observations that are embedded within culture and language over generations of time living in a particular place. And so there's benefits for everybody in doing that,
When maybe learning in kind of a mainstream kind of gatekeeping type culture that can be here, learning to be quiet and listen and amplify the voices that should be amplified, I think that's a challenge too, is I think people get intimidated by conservation, outdoor rec, or just haven't had good experiences in the past. So how can we try to shift that to make it feel that there is truly a space for everyone, and that these activities should actually be led by the indigenous voices that are here instead of marginalized again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet.